welcome everyone here, and we make sure if you have your names and district on your screen. We won't go through a formal roll call, but certainly if it's there, we'll have it captured on the screen. Colin, just a short note: are we recording this this morning? If individuals miss it.
Yeah, the meeting's currently being recorded, and
okay, perfect.
we're just gonna get our slides up here. If you just give us 1 sec.
Okay, great. We got the housekeeping skate up there. And again, just a reminder to use the hand raise function in Zoom, and we will watch that as well as the screen. And I'll try to recognize you, but give me a little bit of patience here. I have a number of screens to go through to make sure I can make sure everyone has the opportunity to speak. And again, under our new bylaws, every member here having a vote. If you aren't a member, though, certainly reserve and do not use the polling function when we go to the resolution portion of the meeting. And again, just to let you know that the meeting's being recorded. So in the event we would like, if someone misses the meeting, we have it recorded for the future, as we do have a guest speaker today with some information and updates on tariffs. So welcome everyone here. I guess the first order of business is we have today's agenda on the screen. It also was forwarded out to you in your package when you received your Zoom invite for today. So I'll get a mover and seconder for the agenda that is in front of you. You would like to raise your hand. Kevin Peters. And a seconder, Shannon Piziak. Were there any changes or questions on that agenda that was in front? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask the question: are there any opposed to that motion to accept the agenda? And seeing none, that is carried. The minutes from our last meeting were also circulated with your packages. So I would like a motion to accept the minutes as circulated, please. Michael Clark, and seconder for that motion. Lee Smith. Thanks, Lee. Any questions or business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, I will ask, are there any opposed to that motion? Okay, seeing none, that motion is carried. So we will now go on to my opening remarks this morning here for our Spring Advisory Council meeting. Good morning again, everyone. And again, my name's Jill Verway, and currently president of Keystone Agricultural Producers. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend today's meeting. I know as we start to approach seeding with snow melts in parts of the province, your free time becomes less and less available. So I certainly appreciate everyone taking the time out to attend today's Advisory Council meeting to ensure that we stay connected with our membership across the province. Today's agenda includes updates from KAP, cross-provincial discussion. We have some time for resolutions, and we also have one guest speaker today. Excited to have again Tyler McCann. He joined us at our AGM, and he is joining us today as a guest from the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute to provide you with an update on the current state of trade in agriculture, which is ever changing hour by hour and day by day. Before we get into the rest of the agenda, I just want to give you a brief update since our AGM the beginning of February. Keystone Agricultural Producers sent a delegation to the Canadian Federation of Agriculture's AGM later in February with a delegation of 4 directors, and we had 2 staff travel with us as well. We had great discussion with fellow producers and others working in agriculture across Canada on a various range of topics. KAP did have a resolution passed by the CFA membership, which dealt with integrated weed management strategies for dealing with kochia specifically. We also were able to work with other organizations to ensure that Manitoba's perspectives were reflected in the debate and resolutions that passed. Trade and tariffs were, of course, top of issue that people had on their minds and continue to have on our minds as we navigate this new year. And we are fortunate to hear from a number of expert speakers on that issue as well. We're also able to spend some time with Cody Blas, who for a brief time was Canada's new Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. And we talked about the priorities in our sector and, some positive outcomes from those discussions with members actually transpired during his short tenure as the Minister of Agriculture. Additionally, I was honored to be acclaimed as the first Vice President of CFA and will be serving in this role on their executive for the upcoming 2-year term. My focus will be to ensure that prairie issues we face here in Manitoba are brought to the forefront in national discussions at CFA and other venues where I am representing the interests, of course, of all Canadian farmers. A brief update on flooding outlook that, of course, probably might change over the weekend, but as we prepare for the growing season, we've seen the latest outlook from the province, bringing some good news for many parts of the province with low to moderate risk in spring flooding in Manitoba. There are some moderate flooding risks that were identified along the Assiniboine River from Russell to Brandon, Souris River, Coquille River, Fisher River, and Icelandic River, with minor flood risks reported in the Red, Pembina, Rat, Roseau, Winnipeg, Saskatchewan, Churchill, and Carrot and Swan Rivers, as well as the White Shell Lakes area. Now, on the topic of tariff and trade between China and the United States, the topic of tariffs and trades has been all-consuming in the recent months. KAP has been at the table when it comes to dealing with this issue. We were honored to be selected to serve, and I continue to serve on the Premier's U.S. Trade Council alongside other business leaders in Manitoba to advise the government on concerns that need to be considered when bringing forward a plan to address tariff impacts. This has been especially helpful as another place to bring forward the interests of the Manitoba farmers directly to the Premier and his team. KAP has also been working to bring together stakeholders from across the value chain, including commodity group members, exporters, crop input suppliers, transportation, and others, to put forward a summary of impacts from the U.S. tariffs. We also have summarized these discussions and made recommendations for concrete actions that the provincial and federal governments can take to support producers and the value chain. When it comes to the Chinese tariffs, we continue to coordinate locally with the Manitoba Canola Growers Association and Manitoba Pork Council, as well as other national associations to ensure that our advocacy efforts and messages are aligned. On this file, we are communicating with the provincial government on a regular basis to bring forward impacts and solutions so addressing the issue stays on top of their radar. Last week, Keystone Agricultural Producers attended Manitoba Budget Day at the legislature. Colin will provide some further details on that budget, but some of the highlights include future commitment of $100 million to support producers in relation to tariffs, 5 additional vet seats for Manitoba students for Saskatoon, as well as an additional $500,000 for Sustainable Agricultural Manitoba, the SAM program, as well as increases to loan limits and rebates through MASC. On the federal front, over the weekend, we saw an election call by Prime Minister Mark Carney, who was in that role for just a brief period of time after taking over from Justin Trudeau. KAP is working through CFA to advocate with the federal parties and candidates with priorities of Canadian agriculture. These are wide-ranging in the CFA's platform priorities, which can be found on their website. This includes an area where you can take action as a producer and send your candidate an email to help lend support of these priorities. The 3 pillars of CFA priorities are competitiveness, rules-based trade, and resiliency. From a Manitoba perspective, our main priority is to see that each party brings forward a plan to deal with tariffs as we see this, US and China, and managing Canadian market access for key products like canola, pork, potatoes, oats, cereal crops, and others. On a final note, more recently, we saw some changes to agri-stability. Minister Cody Blas announced in the recent days, in light of the trade situation in Canada, the federal government is increasing the compensation rate from 80 to 90%, with the maximum payment cap doubling now to $6 million. There's also mention of some larger interim payments to producers. The government of Manitoba signed on to these changes this week, noting the changes will not take place formally until after the federal election concludes. We continue to speak with them about this to get more details on how this will look and impact farmers. Thank you again for attending today. I know that with trade situation we find ourselves in, many of you have many concerns and fears of what this means to your farm and ability to operate in the black. Rest assured that KAP is doing everything that we can to bring forward concerns of producers like yourselves and advocate with government to take appropriate actions. I encourage everyone to reach out to your local district rep on the KAP board or to our office directly if you have any concerns or examples on how this trade situation is impacting your bottom line. This continues to help us to advocate to government to have real examples that we can point out in our own backyard. And with that, we will now move on to the next part of our agenda with the membership update. Screen. So we have a few dates that are listed here as we continue to have things updated at a rapid rate, thanks to Shona and the KAP team, and showing our year-to-date for March the 21st numbers with members at 2365, supporters of additional 748, and opt-ups of 257. The one thing that I would like to mention is with the you will see an increased number on opt-outs, but we will see that leveling out for the year, which will be consistent. We can anticipate for the rest of the year. We encouraged members to have those opt-outs put out and input right at the very beginning of the year so that it provides better customer service at the designated purchasers, making sure that those opt-out lists are complete at the beginning of the year so that questions going forward are answered quickly and effectively. So good work to get those numbers up to date as soon as possible. Are there any questions on the membership report before we go on to the next slide? Shona is here on the call if there's anything that any members have questions on the membership report. Okay, seeing that I don't have any hands here, we will go on to the next item on our agenda, which is the General Manager and Operations Report. So Colin.
Thanks, Jill. You can hear me okay? Right.
Yeah, it's great.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks everyone again for being here, and thanks Jill for the update from your perspective. So I've wanted to give an update on some of the work we've been doing. So I've been in this role now for just over 2 months. I've been very busy. We've had a lot of things going on. Started the week of Ag Days and just been running ever since, as well, with the U.S. administration changing over that same week. So just a quick high-level update on some of the work we've been doing, and I'll also give a policy update from Neil's perspective because he lost his voice. He's here with us, but he has lost his voice, so he can speak via text, but that's about all. So from an operations perspective, some of the events we've been trying to attend, different events throughout the province, whether that's for our commodity group members or others. We were at we obviously had our AGM. We went to CFA, as Jill had mentioned. Crops Convention was another one I attended with Neil. We went to Edmonton, and that was the Canola Council of Canada and Canadian Canada Grain Council's annual meeting. So that was good to see others from the sector. We heard from former Prime Minister Stephen Harper as well there for sort of an overview of the current geopolitical state. Additionally, we attended a few AGMs and commodity group meetings. We went to turkey, chicken, and then as well to a Manitoba beefs meeting. And then just the other day, I was attending the research and innovation strategy consultation for the province of Manitoba alongside others. There was many of you that I'm sure were there as well, where we talked about what some of the priorities should be for the province of Manitoba when it comes to research and innovation for agriculture moving forward. What are some initiatives that we can put forward to make sure that we're delivering on research and that commodity groups and others conducting the research are enabled with what they need from government in terms of funding, stable funding, and other policy items. So we're happy to support those efforts there. Attended some consultations with MASC, and I see John here is on the call. So good to see you, John, and the Canadian Grain Commission as well. I'll talk a bit more in the policy update about that. On the communications front, we've been trying to sort of stay active on a lot of these issues as they're coming up with the election and others, making some modifications to our website that you'll see in the coming months. We're going to be changing our member benefits platform on there to hopefully make that a bit more user-friendly and give us the ability to update more frequently, because currently we have some delays in that regard. As well, KAP members are now able to access subscription to GrainFox for 25% off. That's a new initiative that we just signed on with GrainFox partnership program. So you would have seen an email come through likely with that giving some of the details and outline there. So we're pretty happy with that. That's some good value for our members to get a discount on a product that many of you may use or something that would be of benefit to you. We attended the budget, and the following day there was a breakfast hosted by the Chamber of Commerce that we attended. I attended with Minister Sala, and did a federal election panel discussion as well with Cam Dahl from Manitoba Pork that was hosted by the farm writers and broadcasters, where we talked about the federal election from agriculture's perspective, and we did get a good story picked up there in the free press on that as well. So I'll talk quickly just about the budget. So one of the things we saw in there, we saw the education property tax credit for farmland remained at 50%. We've been continuing to push for the removal of this from farmland, and it's something we're in ongoing discussions with the province as they work to develop a new funding model for education. So that's something that is one of these ongoing items for many years now. Additionally, there was the $100 million, so that was not in the budget. However, in the budget documents, there was a comment that there was a commitment to future appropriations for this money. This was directly for agricultural producers. So we're working with the province to sort of follow up on that and see what that could look like, how they plan to deliver, et cetera, just to get a bit more detail on that front. As Jill had mentioned, the extra $500,000 in the SAM program, that was one that was very, very oversubscribed last year. So we were pleased to see that the Manitoba Agriculture was able to secure additional funds, because that's a well-used program by producers. The maximum value for livestock predation claims was increased from $3,000 to $7,000 per animal. There was a freeze on hydro rates as well. Going back as well to the MASC loan changes. So the young farmer rebate was increased from 30 to 40,000, as well as the loan itself was up from 300 to 400,000. So that's good, just to get some extra capital access for young farmers who are looking to get that as well. There was a business security rebate for $10 million that will be up to $2,500 per business. So we have been in communication with the department to see whether farms will qualify for that. So that would be up to $2,500 to help you install any sort of security systems, cameras, etc., things like that. As we know, rural crime is, of course, a concern that continues to persist. So as we get more information on that, we will be sure to provide that to our members. So in terms of the budget, I guess the last couple items I would just highlight would be the $75,000 for the vet service districts. That's just to help maintain some animal hospitals in rural communities and attract vets for livestock, poultry, as well as companion animals. And then the 5 seats from in BC and Saskatchewan. So that puts us to a total of 75 veterinary medical seats for Manitobans to become veterinarians. Crown land lease freeze on rates was also sort of maintained in there. From the policy standpoint, there were 2 consultations with the Canadian Grain Commission over the past few months. The first was on the Producer Payment Protection Program. Our comments focused on the importance of the program for producers, the need for better monitoring of financial status for grain companies, and the benefit of reducing the administrative costs of the program. The second consultation was one where we attended with other producer groups. So we met with Chief Commissioner David Hunt, as well as the rest of the team at the commission. And some of the issues that were raised by the group included accountability, fee increases, surplus, and producer payment protection. With MASC, we had provided feedback on their environmental linkages pilot program. So this is something that is part of the sustainable KAP agreement that they had with the province and the federal FPT governments had. So looking at how to utilize BMPs as a method to reduce premium costs. Our comments were focused on the challenges to generate producer interest when incentives are low, the need to expand the program eligibility, and then a recommendation to be offering multiple streams for this program. The PMRA, the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, the federal agency that's responsible for overseeing pest control products. Last year, they announced the increase to a plan to increase registration fees under their regulations. We, alongside many other groups, we worked with CropLife and many others across the national stage, just about some concerns on the added cost this would result in for producers and companies, as well as the limited, this would reduce the access that producers would have to products that you use to help manage pests and other issues on your farm. So we did, alongside, again, all those groups, ask Health Canada to put a pause on these amendments and find a cost-sharing structure that works better for government, industry, and producers. Last week, we were pleased to see that the decision to implement the fee increase may be delayed from PMRA. So that's something that we're pleased to see, and hopefully they take advice from the industry that has been brought forward. On the vacant land tax, the federal government is proposing such a tax to promote residential development on vacant lands. KAP undertook some research, and we discovered that farmers do own residential land that's either vacant or presently farmed. So for farmers, this vacant land tax would neither advance residential nor adequately address the current housing issues we have in Canada. So our comments on that just highlighted our opposition to taxing vacant residentially zoned land where a farm operation or farmer is involved. So that's something that Neil had put together in discussions with others. Of course, tariffs are going to be kind of the big ticket item that we're all focused on. We have been for months now. So US tariffs on Canadian goods, as well as the Chinese tariffs. We've been meeting across, the sector, across the value chain. We've put together some, Jill had made a mention there, putting together a collection of sort of commodity groups and others, transportation, crop input companies, et cetera. And we hosted a meeting in late January, put together a summary and some broad recommendations to the province, as well as some things they could work on to push the federal government. We had a follow-up meeting later on in February and had some more pointed recommendations. So we've had some positive feedback from the province, and we have some meetings planned to talk about those in a bit further in depth to see how we can work to get them implemented and have the concerns addressed from everybody involved. Additionally, on the Chinese tariffs, this is one that we're sort of working with others nationally, and that's the same for the U.S. issue. But on the Chinese one, we are working with the canola sector and the pork sector closely, just to sort of ensure that we're all singing from the same songbook, if you would, and really encouraging that diplomatic discussions with the Chinese government happens from Canada. I already talked about the budget, so Neil and I were thinking the same things. And the last is just an update from a previous resolution. There was a resolution referred to committee from July 2024 on water control infrastructure. So this was referred to the Environment and Land Use Committee for further review and discussion. Manitoba Transportation and Infrastructure did join the committee to speak about this resolution. So the department had said that if the inlet structure were modified, this would lead to additional environmental concerns. They also talked about the limitations with water flow in the floodway, which can only accept ice-free water since the bridges and crossings were not constructed in a manner that could withstand ice flow. So changes to elevation with the floodway inlet would also require changes throughout the floodway. The St. Andrews Lock and Dam is intended to back water up to Winnipeg to allow for navigation along the city banks. So if water levels at the St. Andrews Lock and Dam were lowered, this would affect the water level around the Winnipeg region. So the Environment and Land Use Committee recommends that the Advisory Council not proceed further with the water control infrastructure resolution, and that KAP focus on advocating for increased compensation when it comes to overland flooding. So that covers, I guess, a snapshot of the work we've been doing over the past few months here since our AGM. I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has. If you think of some later as well, you can send me an email or give me a call anytime. But Jill, I think that sort of covers my update, and I believe I'm right on time.
Yes, you are. So
I do see a question.
Yes, I do see a hand up. Just if you can say your name, please, and district that you're calling in from.
Kevin Stott, District 4.
Go ahead, Kevin. Sorry, Kevin, Kevin, can I get you?
The request was to put a control gate in there so that you could still stop the ice from going down there. But once the ice was gone, that you could open the resolution must have been. Hello?
Yeah, sorry, Kevin, you're breaking up. Can I get you to type your question in the chat? It's just we're having problems hearing your question.
Okay, I moved a little bit now. Am I better now?
You're better now, yeah.
Okay, I was just saying the resolution, I think one part was left out. We were wondering if they could put a control gate in there so they could still stop the ice from going through the floodway. But once the ice was gone, they could let more water go through the floodway. We knew that all infrastructure wasn't built for the ice impact.
I think in the Neil can't speak. He's actually he is on the call, but I think a lot of their concerns came with the navigation along adjusting it, and that it was bigger than just the flood control, Kevin. But for sure, if you if you'd like some further clarification, Neil can certainly send you the update or speak to you on exactly what was referred to at the meeting if you have some other concerns. But this was the resolution that was passed at that July meeting last year. It wasn't changed after the meeting.
Thank you.
Seeing there's no other questions here, we will move on to our guest speaker. Is Tyler on the call?
Yes, I am, Jill. I am here.
Hi, how are you this evening?
I'm well, Jill. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, I'll give the mic over. I see your presentation was loaded up. Now it's
Yeah, I'm going to actually share my screen because Jill, I was just
Okay.
actually making some changes to it even after I sent it to Colin this morning. So Colin, I hope that's okay. So just give me 1 minute to do that. And part of the reason why I was making changes this morning is because this is such an evolving landscape. And so what I'm going to try and do today is really speak to the lay of the land, so to speak, kind of what our understanding of what's driving the tariffs. I'm not going to get into a lot around what the impacts are. I'll speak to this, I think, a couple of times through the presentation, just given the significant uncertainties and unknowns and the realities of the very different impacts in different value chains. But we'll end with some thoughts around what government is going to do next, and happy to take questions and get into a discussion after. I will start with a cartoon. I blame some of this on the Western Producer. Last December, they ran a cartoon that said, a farmer on Santa's knee goes, overall, it was a pretty good year, so don't overdo it in 2025. I don't want it going to my head. Well, I think that it's certainly not being overdone, and 2025 looks pretty differently than 2024 did, as I'm sure you were all living firsthand. So some of what I'm going to start with really speaks to things that I'm sure are very clearly top of mind to you and you understand. But the Canada-US relationship really isn't an integrated one, and often, the outside of ag and the mainstream, they like to talk about how often auto parts go back and forth. But the ag example that I like to use is, if you start with potash in Saskatchewan, that's exported down to Iowa to grow corn. That corn in Iowa is sent to Minnesota. There's pigs from Manitoba that are also sent to Minnesota. In Minnesota, they use that Iowa corn growing with Canadian potash and Canadian piglets to raise hogs. That pork, those hogs are slaughtered in Minnesota. Some of that Minnesota pork goes to Ontario to feed Ontario consumers, and those Ontario consumers also import about $17 billion worth of other US ag products. And this really is a system that has worked incredibly well for an incredibly long time, and it's hard to kind of understand what that looks like. And we often talk about how important we are to the United States, but it's also really important to understand how important they are to us as well. And I think fertilizer is a really good example of that. So the US provides Canada about 95% of our phosphate supply. I mean, often this is kind of an east-west divide, but about half of their phosphate exports come into Canada. About just over half of the nitrogen fertilizer that we use in Canada comes from the United States. And then Canada provides 80% of the US potash needs. About 40% of our production goes to the US, and about 35% of our nitrogen fertilizer exports go to the United States as well. So yes, it's true, Iowa farmers rely on Canadian fertilizer, but Ontario farmers rely on American fertilizer as well. And this really is kind of a two-way trading dynamic, and there is always this kind of potential possibility of shifting north-south trade to east-west trade in Canada and the United States. But those trade lines and flows are really different, and it's not just as easy as finding rail cars and moving products across the country differently. We really have optimized this north-south dynamic really well. We'll go through a couple of stats, first in the Canadian context, and then in the Manitoba context, and I will send my revised presentation to Colin so he can circulate it to the group as well, so you can take a look at these. But the reality is, outside of grains and oilseeds production, we are pretty reliant on the U.S. market, especially in our processed food products. I will get into that on the next slide. Grains and oilseeds is different. It really is more dedicated to the rest of the world, but by and large, most of the trade that happens is with the United States in the Canadian ag context. And it does highlight some of the differences that when we get into US versus China, the way that the industry is reacting to those tariffs, I think really speaks to kind of where you sit on this graph. And are you in one of those places that has a significant trade with the United States, or are you one that's trading more with the rest of the world? When you look at manufactured foods, effectively all, and the vast majority of most of our manufactured goods in agriculture in Canada are exported to the United States. And regardless of what it was, if you were not already effectively all your exports going to the United States, you were more concentrated in the United States today than you were a couple of years ago. And I think meat is a really interesting example where I think in pork, we've got a pretty good story around trade diversification. In beef, there's been a lot of work gone on over the last 10 years as markets have opened up post BSE. But again, the trend over the last couple of years has been increasing consolidation in our exports to the United States. So in our manufactured agri-food products in the country, all of these sectors are more than 60% export dependent to the United States. And most of them are over 80% export dependent to the United States. It really is a relationship that works really well. And, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about food processing, but the access to the United States market has really enabled growth in value-added agriculture in the country. We have seen increased capital investment in value-added processing in Canada over the last 5 years, and that has largely been to meet the needs of the U.S. marketplace. It really has been what's enabled that growth, and that is all under pressure today in ways that it wasn't under pressure before. We have seen this kind of pressure over the last couple of years around Canadian agriculture exports to the United States. RBC put out a report a couple of weeks ago, again, that they had started prior to this about Canada or losing its edge in agri-food exports. We've seen the challenges with supply chain disruption. We've seen these, even outside of labor stoppages, kind of these choke points in our transportation infrastructure. And like all of those things together contribute to the fact that it's just so much easier for Canada to do business in the United States. And so our agri-food exports are more dependent on the US than they've been in the last 25 years, or 20 years rather. And I half joke, but half seriously say our efforts over the last 10 years to diversify trade to the Indo-Pacific have largely failed. Like we are not. The reality is it's been so easy to do business and so much opportunity in the United States that's where our export growth is. Canadian ag exports have grown. We reached effectively $100 billion, and more of those are going to the United States today, or maybe not today. Last December, more of those were going to the United States than they had been 5 or 10 years earlier. And it really, I think, just underscores how dependent we are in the United States. And it speaks to kind of the significant impact that this here. And again, one of the reasons why trade diversification hasn't really happened yet in any significant way is because of these barriers that we get into. And so it's important to understand that as much as we talk about the need to diversify away from the United States, we have supply chain issues. We have limitations in how much capacity we have to move product out of Canada into other markets, and it really creates an issue. If we look at it in Manitoba, again, these are trade balance numbers. I'm sure all of you have a pretty good understanding these days of what your specific value chain is, but I think it's worth highlighting that by and large, with the exception of corn, Manitoba relies on that U.S. market for its exports. Worth highlighting, the other grain is effectively oats, from what I can tell, looking at it, but we've got this pretty significant trade in products. We'll highlight that the trade balance numbers on oil seeds are low, and that's in part because there's a pretty even trade, or not pretty even trade, I guess $100 million difference, but Canada is a significant importer of oil seeds, except soy. It's kind of the way that the government tracks it, but effectively that means canola, a significant importer of canola from the United States, but also a significant exporter as well. And if you look at that kind of trade balance on oilseed products, and you kind of break down the numbers that are on the chart on the left, we do export a lot of canola, but we import a lot of canola seed for processing, but we export a lot of sunflower, we export a lot of seed for sowing, export a lot of mustard, and kind of this big other category that, again, the stats include things like hemp seed and other oilseed products. And so even in something like the broad kind of oilseed basket, that trade relationship with the United States is complicated, and it's a two-way street, and it's hard to really kind of narrow that down further. Looking at the processed food angle again in the Manitoba context, by and large, the trade balances are pretty narrow, except on grains and oilseeds products, where we're major exporters, and fruit and vegetable manufacturing, which is effectively potato exports. And so we are, again, Manitoba agriculture has got quite a bit at stake looking at these numbers that are here. And it is always, I think, I'm not looking at exports and import. I'm not looking specifically just at exports. I think it's important to think about it in the context of the trade balance with these relationships, because often when we get into trying to really understand what the impacts of these are, you need to look at what are our exports, you need to look at what are our imports, the ability to do import substitution. And if I just go back to this chart on the oil seeds, I think it's an example where, we've got issues like seed for sowing and the oil seed complex, where we have a significant trade surplus, but we can't just offset that with those exports with something else. It's hard to find domestic homes for that, because while we're trade deficit on and importing canola seed, I don't think it's in anyone's interest to have to try and take that seed for sowing that we were exporting to the United States and run it through a canola crush plant instead. So these are complicated, and again, I'm going to go back to that point that the impacts of this potential trade war really depend on the situation that you're in, and what that trading relationship looks like with Canada, the United States, and other parts of the world. On the U.S. tariffs themselves, this is a series of slides that I've been kind of adding to as I've been presenting on this year. Donald Trump was elected at the beginning of November on this American First platform, but this really strong, aggressive approach and pretty specific approach to trades and tariffs really popped up after the election. And so at the end of the November, we saw this kind of big flash in the news that they were looking at a 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada. The Prime Minister rushed down into Mar-a-Lago at the beginning of December, had a famous meeting that was effectively the beginning of the end of his time as Prime Minister. And we saw this cascade. And so on the 20th of January, the president was inaugurated. There was this expectation that the 25% tariffs would come into effect right away. In the initial round of executive orders, the president didn't talk about the 25% tariffs. And I think there was some people that breathed a sigh of relief the afternoon of the 20th, but by the evening of the 20th, the president had clarified that the tariffs would come into effect on February 1st. There was this flurry of activity around the 31st of January, 1st of February, as governments tried to navigate the tariffs coming into effect or not. Effectively, the tariffs came into effect, but were then immediately delayed. They were deferred by at least 30 days, and that got into another round of kind of negotiations and back and forth, keeping in mind in the middle of February, while the broader tariffs were delayed, they did move ahead with tariffs on steel and aluminum, and committed then to further tariffs coming on later on the year. And I'm going to get into this reciprocal tariffs piece that came out, but I think when we saw that, and the kind of the more people have dug into that in the middle of February, it potentially is the greatest impact of all, but it's also one of the ones where it's the most uncertain. So this was largely kind of the timeline of a highlight of events from November to early March. I was giving a presentation in Alberta on the 6th of March. And so from the 3rd of March to the 6th of March, again, we were in this world of headlines when, the 24 hours prior to the 6th of March, this world of trying to navigate the end of the 30-day tariff. And it really, we saw first kind of this effort around cars. There was this talk that the work to avoid the tariffs had fallen apart, that kind of tariffs were coming and it was going to have an impact. But now, so these times are Alberta times. So this was, I did this at 6 o'clock in the morning. Between 6 and 9:30 on the 6th of March, all of that changed again, and this reprieve was given. And again, it's been hard to kind of understand how all of these things play out, but within a couple of hours on the 6th of March, the pressure really came off that first round of tariffs. Gave another presentation a week ago. Again, you try and navigate the path between the 7th of March and the 17th of March. There's been this focus on dairy, a threat of dairy reciprocal tariffs. That was walked back after a couple of days. The government of Ontario imposed their 25% surtax on it. There was an escalation then when Donald Trump was going to double the 25% tariffs that were in place. The export surtax on electricity was pulled back. A meeting was held. There was the sense that kind of relations are there, but Canada did retaliate dollar for dollar on the steel aluminum tariffs with $30 billion of retaliatory tariffs. And one of kind of the things that happened in that time frame is that I think that the broader market impacts on the stock market and other things that we know the U.S. president is concerned about weren't as severe as they had, I think people thought that they would, because of the walkbacks. And I think that's been one of the challenges as people have kind of tried to think through this, is there's always this hope that the impact in the United States will be so bad that the administration will pull back. And by and large, the administration has been pulling back, without it getting bad because of some pressure from U.S. businesses. And I liked the headline on the 16th of March from Bloomberg that talked about Canadians being very confused. And I think it's pretty legitimate for Canadians to still be pretty confused about kind of the state of play. And then between the 16th of March and today, this really is an evolving space. And so I'll get into this a little bit further, but what we've seen again is the president of the administration already walking back kind of this threat of a broad reciprocal tariff on April 2nd. And one of the challenges that we have is that there's kind of a lot of different chatter about what's going on and what's behind this. It's hard to really know what's happening at the end of the day, but the administration is clearly signaling in many different ways that the April 2nd tariffs will be narrower than what the president had spoke to, and the president himself talking about they're going to give lots of breaks. And so it really does speak to the uncertainty of the world that we live in. So where are we actually at today? So this is from the Peterson Institute in the US. We are effectively living in a world where there are tariffs in place between Canada and the United States. There are reciprocal tariffs largely driven today around steel and aluminum. Fentanyl and immigration has been kind of the early motivation that they've used in order to get into this. But at the end of the day, what we know is that, and I'll speak to motivations further, the reason I think why fentanyl and immigration becomes so important is because it allows the US to use emergency powers to bring tariffs in place. It creates this really challenging dynamic because there's a lot of different things happening at the same time. 25% is a common number, but it's being used in many different ways in different contexts. And while Canada has so far worked kind of in the space of matching dollar for dollar tariffs, it's been relatively easy because the tariffs today, while relatively unprecedented, are also relatively contained. An important thing to note is that at the beginning of March, this kind of March 6th announcement. So on the 4th of March, this 25% tariff, this 1 month delay was ended, and the tariffs were imposed. On the 6th of March, the White House amended their March 4th order to exempt USMCA compliant products from the tariff and lowering originally it was a 10% tariff just on energy. They also lowered it at that day on potash to 10% as well. At the beginning, when a lot of us saw that March 6th announcement that any compliant goods would be exempt from the tariff, we thought, oh, that's good news. But when you dig into USMCA compliance, it is a really different story. And some products are largely compliant, but a lot of products aren't. And things like our live hogs are not, and these are national numbers in US dollars, but Canadian exports to the United States. None of the live hogs that we exported to the United States were USMCA compliant. Now, there's a couple of reasons why that seems to be the case. So largely, if the MFN tariff, the most favored nation tariff that exports would pay, was the same as the tariff in USMCA, there was no benefit of going through the effort to kind of file the paperwork that you need to file to become USMCA compliant. But if you go from, an MFN tariff that was the same, often zero on something like live swine, to a 25% tariff versus a USMCA 0% tariff, all of a sudden the tariff advantage changes and it becomes worthwhile to kind of put the paperwork in and become compliant. So I expect on something like swine, where, it is what it is, it's a pig is born on a farm, you can relatively easily manage the compliance burden, you will see a shift from 0% USMCA compliant to 100% USMCA compliant. That's different, though, on some of these processed food products. And like to use bakery and tortilla products as an example. So we have a major trade surplus on bakery and tortilla products. We export $4 billion more to the US on bakery goods than we import from them. Only 9% of those are USMCA compliant. Banana bread is the example of something that may not be able to become USMCA compliant because all of those, effectively the majority or almost effectively all of those ingredients need to become from the USMCA region. But if you use a lot of bananas in your banana bread, you may not be able to source those from Canada, the United States, or Mexico, and that may mean that banana bread may never be USMCA compliant. And so I expect a lot of people are going through the formulations of their products now to make sure that they can meet the rules of origin pieces that are there. in the background of all of this tariff chatter is USMCA renegotiations, and there's this, I think, dynamic playing out around how do you manage the USMCA space, and is there validity that's there? But we know that the renegotiation is coming. This is something that the president baked into the agreement. On the 6th anniversary, there would be this joint review. I think up until relatively recently, the Canadian government was saying, we don't expect this to be a renegotiation. We expect this just to be a review. But clearly that's there. And there every now and again, you'll see Canadian politicians talk about, let's move that review up as a way to get past the tariffs that are there. If you look at the executive orders that the president did sign on the 20th of January, he did highlight kind of starting the work to understand the impact of the USMCA on American workers, farmers, ranchers, service providers, and other businesses. And the expectation is that will all feed into that USMCA review. But I think it's also important to understand that Jameson Greer, the new United States Trade Representative, has talked about that review as a way to address market access issues that they negotiated the first time. Like, he does talk about it as if it would be more of a review and not a full renegotiation. And although there's clearly some different views in the U.S. dairy industry, Greg Dowd, who is a former chief ag negotiator and now head of the National Milk Producers Federation, has talked about the need for the U.S. administration to take a thoughtful and tailored approach to dealing with the outstanding issues with Canada. Now, that does not mean what Donald Trump is doing, but we're in this kind of space where we need to kind of navigate what does that thoughtful, tailored approach look like. We don't fully know yet where that's going. I'll point out tomorrow morning, KAP and Real Ag Radio are co-hosting a webinar. Greg Dowd will be one of our panelists on it, and encourage you to tune into that if you're interested in sending more. But let's kind of shift and look at what comes next. I'm going to go over this relatively quickly just to say that reciprocal tariffs are the next big thing. Middle of February, Donald Trump came up with this plan. When we talk about reciprocal, it's just worth highlighting that it's not just matching tariff for tariff. They are trying to find ways to level the playing field as much as they can, and that includes trying to deal with things like the GST in the Canadian context, or digital services tax, non-tariff barriers. And so everybody's waiting to see, how do you actually put that all together in a way that puts a reciprocal tariff in Canada? What we know, though, is, as is often the case, as of what we've seen over the last little while, that the United States is already backing off from some of that. We understand that rather than it being a global tariff, they seem to be targeting the 15 countries, what they refer to as the Dirty 15, where they've got the largest trade deficits. That includes Canada. But they're going to avoid tariffs on auto, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals. The sense seems to be that what they're doing inside the U.S. government today is trying to come up with a simple tariff that they can impose on countries, so it will be economy-wide. They're not going to match dairy tariffs with dairy tariffs, but they'll put one tariff across the Canadian economy with the potential for some of these sector-specific ones that will reflect the average tariffs, the value-added taxes, digital taxes, and other things that go into the mix. And that will set up further negotiations after to be able to pull back those. So the sense, the Americans really do seem to be pretty clear of what, that this is setting up further negotiations at the end of the day. And that those countries that are playing better with them may get those negotiations to reduce the reciprocal tariff earlier on at the end of the day. So why is the US doing this? I mean, the president said, tariffs are the most beautiful word in the dictionary. But that's not kind of the whole story. There's a real movement behind this, right? There's this push for people to drive for generational change in the international trading system. Robert Lighthizer, who was USTR in the first administration, wrote a really interesting book. I think it's worth reading, really speaking to kind of what's behind this. I think Lighthizer was often seen as a bit of a kind of out on his own. The first go round, Lighthizer and Peter Navarro were there, but there's now this collection of people behind him, including Stephen Murin, who wrote this paper late last year that I think speaks to a lot of the ideological underpinnings that are behind it. But I was struck not last weekend, the weekend before, the Globe and Mail, there were these competing headlines. And one effectively talking about this great plan and vision coming out of the meetings that Canadian and Ontario officials had with Howard Lutnick. And the second story talking about how this kind of crazy nature going on in the United States is blowing up whatever ideological underpinnings were behind it. And so there really is this kind of contrast in, is this a well thought out plan or is this not? And what does it all mean? But at the end of the day, what we know is there are a whole bunch of different reasons that the US has invoked for these tariffs. It could be about increasing revenues. It could be about fentanyl, could be about building a fortress North America. It could be about reducing trade deficits, bringing manufacturing jobs home, could be about weakening Canada so that we could be the 51st state. But ultimately, what all of this means is that it is really hard to figure out how do you negotiate with the Americans, because you need to know what the other side of the negotiating table is asking for. And that's pretty hard to tell these days. Around the world, we have seen different responses. And up until our prime minister changed, Canada had been taking one of the most aggressive responses to the United States, moving quickly to match tariffs dollar for dollar. That was a contrast with what we saw in Mexico, where President Sheinbaum was taking more of a steady as she goes, wait and see approach, did not impose retaliatory tariffs at the end of the day. At the time, it seemed like that didn't matter, that regardless of whether or not you were playing hardball or softball, the same Mexico and Canada were getting the same outcomes. Where that may start to have an impact is once we get past April 2nd and you get into this world of trying to renegotiate down this global tariff that they're bringing in. And maybe Mexico may all of a sudden may get some extra credit for having played nice. But even in Europe, the EU, the European Union, was taking a tougher stance compared to the United Kingdom. And it's really been this mix at the end of the day. Looking at what this all means for the US farmer, it's important to understand that, their approach to farm support is obviously very different. In this case, I laugh because Forbes compares trade aid to the cost of the US nuclear deterrent program. That's something that they keep coming back to in their coverage, talking about how in the last go round, the US government spent more on supporting farmers than it did on its nuclear forces. But if you look at how that support to farmers has changed over the last several years, it really has been largely through ad hoc programs from Congress. And if you look at what that means in 2021, in the context of the pandemic, but also in the several years before then, the share of farm incomes in the United States from government payments was increasing. And there's kind of the similar thing has happened in Canada, but in Canada, it was largely driven by the drought and large crop insurance payments. In the United States, it was driven by trade aid and pandemic assistance. And so, there really is just this reality that farm incomes are not as impacted because of all of this support that's there. And I think if you really look at what they expect to see happen this year, it really is pretty striking at the end of the day how much money US farmers are going to get at the end of the day. I'm going to try and switch gears to China. Really want to drive home this timeline that in my mind starts last May, where the US president imposed his tariffs on China. That really set the stage for Canada to respond. In August, Pierre Poilievre called on the government of Canada to match tariffs. He was seen to be trying to get out ahead of the government itself. At the end of August, the then finance minister, Freeland, announced that Canada would effectively match the US. In response to that, in early September, China launched an anti-dumping investigation. And then in October, Canada's tariffs actually came into effect. And the cartoon here is from late last year in September from the Western Producer again, but really speaks to this dynamic that farmers are there. And that brings us to March 8th, when China moved ahead to actually impose tariffs in response. Putting tariffs on oil and meal and canola, peas, pork, and beef, although we don't export any beef to China today, than most seafood. The impact that we're dealing with is likely in the billions. And it really has created the space where, as much as China is trying to play into this, and, we should be trading more. And I think that there's been this call from farmers to try and pull back on those EV tariffs. The reality is the pressure is also coming from the other side to actually go further and imposing more tariffs on China to try and match what's happening in the United States. So I like to think about Donald Rumsfeld's quote about known knowns and known unknowns and the known unknowns. And he was using that in the context of an actual war at the time, but I think it's really relevant in the context of a trade war as well. So what do we know about the situation with the United States? We know that the US is trying to blow up the global trading system. We know that Canada is going to suffer a lot more than the United States. We don't have a good understanding of why, how long it will last, what's the best way to negotiate, and what it means for the future of the USMCA. And we don't really understand what the unintended consequences are. There's just so much happening in this space, it's hard to make sense of it. In the China context, we're in this world where we know that Canada's caught between China and the United States. We know that those two countries are playing games. And China is this master at 3D chess, and China's being thoughtful in how it imposes its tariffs. Worth noting that there is this ongoing anti-dumping investigation on canola seed. Canola seed was not hit in this first round of tariffs, but that may come at the end of the day. But we don't know what the ultimate Chinese endgame is. We don't know where the anti-dumping investigation is known. And all of this is happening in this broader geopolitical landscape that's tough. So I want to just end with some thoughts about what we can do. And ultimately what we need to do is move past the status quo. And I think that is, hopefully, I think that this is the shock that we needed at the end of the day. Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think that that's what we should be drawing inspiration from. Last year, we did a risk survey. We're out in the field with it now. I'll share a link that hopefully everybody can take some time to fill out. But it identified top actions, top priorities for action. And I think it's some of what can spur our thinking around where we go next. Calling on governments to do better on regulations, taxes, R&D, innovation, trade policy and advocacy, and climate change adaptation. I think that those probably resonate pretty well with everyone here. It would be better if government was focused more on those things. We distilled all of that work into 4 big takeaways. Governments need to do less, but do it better. We need to find ways for the sector to work better together. We need clearer roles for government and others, and we need clearer roles, and then we need better goals to know where we're going at the end of the day. And I can speak to more of this later if anyone wants. Canada has acted since all of this started. We have tightened things up at the border. We did announce a new trade agreement with Indonesia that could have some good things, especially if you're a wheat exporter in Canada. We have seen governments move to reduce internal trade barriers in ways that they haven't for the last 25 years. But I'd like to say the biggest thing that's changed since this trade war is that we have a new prime minister, and we're in the middle of an election campaign. And so the Liberal Party clearly didn't let the tariffs go to waste, and it'll be interesting to see what the country decides to do after. We have kind of set out at KAP some other things that we could do to get our domestic house in order. A lot of these things are fixing things that we should be doing anyways, like dealing with our regulatory issues, like modernizing our ag policy framework, like working with other like-minded countries. And we hope to see governments take more of this on. I will effectively wrap up here with a couple of comments around how do we actually respond to this. This is clearly, I expect to become a campaign issue. The best outcome for all of us is that we just avoid the pain and suffering, right? We find ways to work with China, work with the United States to reduce the impact of the tariffs. The BRM suite is not well positioned. And if you look at the results from survey work we did earlier this year, it highlighted that farmers are far more confident in their ability to manage production risks today than market risks. I think that really speaks to the fact that the suite of tools that government offer farmers today don't really help deal with market risks. The reality is at the current trigger level within agri-stability, if you're a grains and oilseeds farmer, you probably have to endure very significant losses before you trigger a payment. And we're trying to work with some partners to get a better handle of it. But even with the changes that were announced last weekend about increasing the compensation rate and the maximum payments, that's likely not going to result in kind of very meaningful support for grains and oilseeds farmer. But it's tough. And I don't often feel sorry for government, but I feel sorry for governments and trying to figure out how do you navigate what compensation looks like in this. We really don't know how long these tariffs are going to last. We don't know what their impacts are going to be on markets. We know that, or governments know that grain farmers in particular have some more flexibility potentially with their marketing options as a way to potentially mitigate the impact. If you rush out and offer this huge compensation package, you get into this danger of moral hazard, and it might influence decisions farmers make and might lead to unintended consequences. We know that not everybody's going to experience losses equally. For example, if you're a grains and oilseed farmer that's got a more diversified crop rotation, you probably are going to be in a better position than somebody that grows more of their farm on canola. And so how do you kind of navigate all of these different issues at the end of the day is a challenge. And I think the biggest challenge for governments is that this isn't just an agriculture issue, this is an economy-wide issue. And so they're going to be looking at how do you compensate all of that at the end of the day. And my kind of last plea is that we should be thinking about this in the context of the broader set of issues Canadian agriculture faces, where the fundamentals that have driven success in the sector for the last 10 years in particular are changing. Our ag policy framework is old. We don't have a clear kind of sense of where we're going on ag policy in this country. We've had what I refer to as an everything for everyone approach. And clearly we need to think differently. We need to be able to move past how do we stabilize the sector, and then how do we get into revitalizing ag policy in this country? How do we think longer term, but give us more ability to adapt? And how do we balance the need to be far more proactive, I think, with the risk management supports we offer farmers, but also the investments that we're making, and move away from this reactive approach at the end of the day. And so happy to take questions, Jill, but maybe we'll leave this up here. We are doing our 2025 risk survey that's there. I can also put a link in the chat, but there's a QR code that you can scan with your phone if you're interested. It takes about 10 minutes, and we value the input of producers from across the country and would welcome everybody taking the time to fill that out. So don't know if there's any questions or discussion that anybody would like to see.
Well, thanks very much, Tyler. So I guess that leads to everyone's anticipation that everyone should sign up for your podcast with Real Ag tomorrow. We're going to get the answers to all the questions.
Well, we've been talking to the panelists about that, Jill, and they all assure us that actually nobody has any answers right now. That there's probably 3 people, Trump, Lutnick, and Navarro, that actually know what's going on, and I'm not even sure how much they know what's going on these days either.
Sometimes I'm thinking that it's President Trump is the only one that knows the answer to those questions as to where things are leading, but reassuring to hear that I think that there is that they are questioning what is definitely happening in the United States through some of the conversations that I've been involved in. Producers in the States are as concerned with the situation status quo as we are too. But we do have to realize that we do have a really strong relationship that has worked well for both countries over the last number of years, and we've built a lot of what we have based on that relationship. So my question to you is, how do we move beyond that? Like, we can't fill that market. And then if you maybe want to comment on that, because that's asked, brought up a lot, and then I'll open the floor for questions.
Yeah, and I think the unfortunate reality, Jill, that we all need to kind of understand is that in some situations the reality is we can't move past the US market, right? And so it is about how do we try and find ways to live with it, and anything around kind of moving away is probably a 10 or 20 year goal, not a 6-month goal at the end of the day. It is worth highlighting that the president is really sensitive to the perspectives of US farmers, and I think that we do need to really appreciate that relationship at the end of the day, and really keep driving home to US farmers as often as possible what that looks like. And I really think it's important to understand that needs to happen outside of Washington. And I think that there's been this real effort to spend a lot of time in Washington talking to people, but I think the time that you would spend talking to farmers in North Dakota is probably better spent than kind of spending a lot of time in Washington. The people in Washington understand the Canadian context really well, but it is the kind of that relationship with the broader US farm sector that's really important. And I think the other thing that really should be driving home is that we may not be able to influence Trump too much. US farmers hopefully will, and hopefully some cooler heads and common sense will prevail. But we should be able to get our own house in order at home. And so I think the question is, how do we do a better job fixing the things that we should have been fixing anyways to reduce the potential impact and consequences on Canadian farmers? You know, I think that really is part of the message is we can't just think about how we fix things out of our borders. We need to be thinking about how do we fix things in our borders too.
Great. Colin, can you share? I can't pull up my participant just to see if anyone has any questions. Right now I have just Tyler up on the screen.
Here I can do that.
Just we do have, I want to allow for, you know, a couple minutes if anyone has a couple questions. We do have resolutions right on the net, but we do have a little bit of time here this morning if anyone has questions. I see
Butch.
Butch has his hand up. Yes, his physical hand. Go ahead, Butch.
My comment is, I understand that the tariff that China has put on us on meal is very small compared to the tariff if they would have put it on seed. Apparently, it's about just a very small percentage, and that's at this point that's not a big deal.
Yeah, the challenge is that we don't know what's going to happen on seed yet, right? And that is, there's a separate anti-dumping investigation that the Canadian exporters have been working to try and navigate with China, and so that would certainly hurt a lot more potentially, likely, than what we're dealing with now on meal and oil. But that shoe is, you know, not yet dropped.
It's also my understanding, like we do import quite a bit of, Americans sell a lot of canola oil seed into Canada as well.
Yeah, and again, so I think if you look at the kind of trade balance, Manitoba is importing canola seed to kind of run through your crush plants, but it's not necessarily kind of a straight substitution piece. And again, you're kind of where you are on the prairies kind of influences what that impact looks like at the end of the day. But clearly, if you look at the impact, the way that the market's reacted, that those Chinese tariffs are having a huge impact. Also worth understanding, right, that kind of the relationship with the US and canola is also a lot more complicated. It's influenced by US renewable fuels policy, for example. That's up in the air. There's significant uncertainty in that space as well. And so the canola market is dealing with a lot of different pressures.
Thank you.
Thanks, Butch, for the question. David Rourke.
The question, I've been told that about 95% of our oats go to the US, but the US grows very few food oats. So will a company like General Mills that rely on those oats to make their Cheerios just pay the tariff? And
so I think that there's a couple of things, David, that could happen. So I think one, we expect to see some arbitrage on pricing, and so, you know, some companies may absorb part of it. The dollar and exchange rate may offset some of it, and some of it may get passed back to the farmer, but it's hard to know kind of fully how that's going to play out. I think it is worth highlighting that, and we saw this in the first Trump administration, they do grant exceptions. The president himself today is talking about it. And so there is, I think, this likelihood that if a company like General Mills goes and says, look, we have no domestic source for these kind of raw ingredients and these raw commodities, we need to import them into Canada, into the United States to support US processing jobs, that they may be able to get an exemption at the end of the day. But there is a significant amount of uncertainty around what that's going to look like, how that's going to play out, and kind of where that goes next at the end of the day. So there's a lot of potential, David, for things to happen that may minimize the impact. I think that if you look at how the president has pulled back from things already over the last couple of months, it kind of leads you to think that there's some of that's going to happen. But I would not, be planning for that to happen yet. That should just be kind of a nice to have outcome, and it may not be the likely outcome.
So the second part of that question, is there any other crops that we grow that are in a similar position where we're the major supplier and they won't be able to fill that?
Yeah, so I think I think it gets to be somewhat complicated. So canola is a bit of an interesting example where canola meal is a really important product for Canadian dairy farm or for US dairies, for example. So how does that play out? What does that look like? They do need it. There's substitution for other products that could happen, but you're not sure kind of what that looks like or how that unfolds. I think by and large, the sense is a lot of the kind of the raw commodities, the primary commodities that are going into the United States are going into processing and are not kind of the offensive things that the administration is really worried about. It does get into more of what about the processed products that may be an issue with U.S. processing jobs at the end of the day. They may not see the same level of exemptions and exceptions.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, David. Just go around the board here if there's any other questions. And Colin, I guess.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, thanks, Tyler, for the presentation. Always like working with you. This is why we have KAPI and we're partners with KAPI on a lot of stuff. There's tremendous value for our members, we feel. Could you quickly touch on the counter tariffs? I know that Canada put out sort of a $200 billion list. They're going to whittle down, kind of cut in half. We've put in a submission with different products we feel should be exempt, including fertilizers, a big one, and some machinery parts. But just talk about that and how that could impact Canadian farmers.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the federal government's tune has changed a bit on tariffs. So a month ago, we were really hearing very aggressive dollar for dollar matching. That is what Canada has done, but by and large, the tariffs have largely been kept kind of steel tariffs on steel tariffs, although there are some, the supply managed products have got tariffs on them now. There's some kind of food that's been pulled into it. The problem that you get into is when you start looking at the potential to try and match economy-wide tariffs, dollar for dollar, Canada needs to tariff a lot of products in order to match the US dollar for dollar. And then you get into this impact around either products like, and this is maybe more of an Eastern Canadian issue, but on imports of fertilizer from the United States. You get into kind of things in the processing space that could have an issue for Canadian farmers, like plastic packaging and wrapping on that they use for processing largely comes from the United States. There's maybe less of an option to try and avoid some of those. But all along, the federal government has been as clear as possible that they want to minimize the impact of those retaliatory tariffs. And I will say that it's a really good example where the work that KAP does to provide that feedback into the government is really helpful in helping the government understand what do they need to do to avoid those tariffs. Like I think if you go back to when the government imposed tariffs on Russia after the Ukraine invasion, it was really black and white. We're putting tariffs on everything that we import from Russia, and we don't care the consequences. And again, that was an issue for Eastern Canadian farmers that import a lot of Russian fertilizer. That's not the approach that they're taking this time. They really are talking about minimizing the impact, but government doesn't understand the impact as well as you would maybe think that they do. So the time and effort you put into providing that feedback to the government helps them kind of navigate how do you do this in a way that reduces the impact. I think the bigger kind of thing that happened is that Carney last week was talking about there is a limit in the dollar for dollar approach. And so if the government of Canada isn't going to try and go dollar for dollar, I think that makes it far more likely that we're not going to get into a world where they're putting tariffs on things that actually have a material impact on Manitoba farmers.
Great. Thank you. Is there anyone else with a quick question? John?
Yes, thank you very much, Jill. I was interested in the list of the many commodities where or products that Canada is not compliant with the USMCA, and makes us look pretty bad. And Trump's always saying that Canada is really nasty. And I wonder if we're that nasty, and whether you can list, or whether the US has as many products or more where they are not compliant with the USMCA.
Yeah, so it's context matters, right? And context often gets lost on the US president these days, it seems. And so again, I think if you look at the example of our swine exports not being compliant, you know, like there's been no reason for them to be compliant. And so they may be non-compliant. That may sound like a dirty word, but it just reflects the nature of the trade and the lack of benefit that comes from USMCA. And I think it's true on both sides, where if countries can avoid the paperwork of needing to be compliant, you know, one of the realities of Canada-US trade outside of the free trade agreements is there aren't a lot of tariffs. It is pretty easy to flow back and forth. So the benefits of using a free trade agreement just aren't there. So yes, like I think that there is still a certain amount of that non-compliance on US imports into Canada, but I don't think that the solution is to kind of try and go tit for tat for that, because really what we should be saying is that it's just not, that compliance is not the way that we should be looking at it. These are products that are good for Americans, good for Canada, and that two-way trade is really, really important and valuable.
Thanks for that question, John. Okay, well, we're moving on in our agenda here, but thank you very much, Tyler. And again, well, maybe Colin, if we can maybe put the link out for that Real Ag program that is on tomorrow. If anyone wants to partake in that to get some more information, that would be great. We'll make that available, certainly, Tyler, so you might have some more listeners tomorrow. And thank you again for coming today. And again, thank you. You know, that partnership with KAP with KAPI is certainly valuable, and I'm glad that we have that relationship for these discussions, especially during the times that we have right now. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jill. Again, the feeling is really reciprocal, and I will say, you know, we've got people across the country, but we really do value the engagement with people that are on the ground. We want to make sure all of the work that we do is relevant to you. And so always happy to work with you, Jill, and Colin and Neil in this work, and look forward to continuing that. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you very much. Thanks. And you'll see in the chat that we have the link for the event tomorrow. And as well, if you didn't catch the code, the link for that updated survey is in the chat as well. If you wanted to take a screenshot and jot it down for later time, that would be great. And I guess with that, we'll move on to the next item that is on our agenda, which is resolution time. So we have one resolution that was forwarded out with the package, as well the resolution procedures. And there is or was a late resolution that we did receive as well, that we will need to get a motion on the floor to deal with that as well. So I will pass the mic, so to speak, over to Colin Penner, who is the chair of the Resolutions Committee, to handle this part of the meeting. And he will go over the procedures, and as well, we'll look after getting a motion to deal with the second resolution today as well. So Colin, and then I guess we have Shannon Pisiak that's on the call, as well as Scott, to help out if needed during this process of the meeting. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Joe. Yeah, Neil, or I guess our procedures, we'll go from there.
Oh, if you want to put the procedures up on the screen, Colin, if you want to share those initially.
Okay, so the procedures, only the result portion will be read. I guess I'll let you guys read through this, or it's been emailed out, but I'll give you a few minutes to actually look through it and go from there. So this is here, the be it resolved. The KAP work with agriculture in the classroom, or sorry, I'm jumping around. Resolve the KAP lobby to the government of Manitoba to revise the school curriculum to include mandatory agricultural literacy components at all grade levels, focusing on the science, economics, and sustainability of agriculture. And be it further resolved that KAP work with agriculture in the classroom Manitoba to ensure that teachers are equipped with up-to-date resources and training to deliver balanced agricultural education and to promote partnerships between schools and local farms that facilitate experiential learning opportunities such as field trips and farm-based projects that provide students with real-world exposure to agriculture. All right, moved by. Can I get a mover?
Scott Penner's got his hand up.
All right, thank you, Scott. Seconded.
Carter McKinney, District 1.
Perfect, thank you, Carter. Scott Penner, would you like to speak to the resolution?
Sure. This is from the students here, I believe. Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think any additional education for agriculture is only going to help our province as a whole. I mean, it's one of our biggest things in the Manitoba economy, and often it's a very misunderstood industry, or there's a lot of misinformation about it. So having students learn a little bit about that is going to, I think, can bring a whole wide variety of perspectives and people getting more involved in our in agriculture in Manitoba.
All right, thank you, Scott. Do the students care to speak to the resolution?
When we decided to come up with this resolution, while discussing, we realized just in our own experiences with school, in high school, elementary school, that the industry is painted in a very negative and biased way to us students. And we feel like that should really be worked to be fixed, as it'd make it more encouraging for people to join the industry, as well as it would help build more public trust between the industry and consumers if students and kids are being taught unbiased opinions, and also the teachers are being equipped with the resources they need and also are being taught proper information about the industry. We think that would benefit a long way for the industry as a whole.
Thank you. Are there any other comments?
Colin, did you want to provide just some additional information on KAP's work with Ag in the Classroom? Just for context.
Colin Hornby, not Colin Penner. It's a great name. I just wanted to provide background as well. So Ag in the Classroom, we donate office space to them at our office every year. We do also help support their advocacy and lobbying efforts with the province. We were helpful in last year, or a couple years ago, securing them some funding. It was $400,000 in funding. We helped them secure that through the provincial government. But this is definitely this is something that fits into some of the work we're doing. And I would say as well, we're presenting sponsors for their upcoming mixer event coming in, I believe, a month or so from now. So we're definitely very engaged with them already, but you know, always good to have sort of a push for additional work, and we're working with them as well on a career pathways program for the upcoming year that we've secured some additional government funds for as well. So just wanted to provide that as a background as you're considering this resolution.
Thank you, Colin. Any other comments before we go to the vote?
I don't see any hands, Colin.
All right, with that, I will call a vote. And we're doing this digitally, right?
Correct, yes. There should be
Yes.
there we go.
So a reminder that it's the members that are allowed to vote. right, thank you. That is passed. That's carried. 91% in favor.
Great.
All right, we have one late resolution from District 1. So we'll need to have a motion to accept late resolutions. Looking for a mover on that. David O'Rourke, District 1, thank you. A seconder?
Carter McKinney, District 1.
Thank you, Carter. Any discussion on whether or not we are accepting the late resolution? Very good. And seeing no comments, I call a vote then on whether or not we're going to accept the late resolution.
You could just,
Oh.
just ask if there's any opposed.
All right, are there any opposed? And I ask that you raise your hand on Teams here or Zoom so that we can see if you're opposed. All right, seeing no opposition, that's carried. Do I have a mover for this resolution? David O'Rourke, District 1. Do you have a seconder?
Carter McKinney, District 1.
Thank you, Carter. David, would you like to speak to the resolution?
Oh, if you want to get it, do you have the full resolution in front of you, Colin? We just have the resolve part, but we need the full resolution read out in full. Do you have it in front of you?
I don't.
I do.
If you have the full resolution, Shannon, do you have the full resolution that was sent out yesterday? Or Scott?
I do not handy in front of me. I'm sorry, Jill.
I can get it in a second here.
You can just pull it off, Scott, and just
Okay.
read the full amount, because there was in the resolve part, they just there was a couple word changes there, Scott, if you want to read the whereas and then the resolve part.
I'm still looking. Okay, here we go. We want the original version or our modified version here?
Well, just the whereas part is fine, and then the resolve part is on the screen. So it's just the whereas part that was sent out yesterday. You'll have to read out.
Right. So the original version, whereas MASC, despite being supplied with third-party hail claim documents, failed to record and adjust the IPI calculation. And the edited version is, well, that's not included in this email, Jill.
It's on the screen, Scott.
Oh, shoot.
I can read the resolve then, Scott.
Okay,
That's
you can-
fine.
The result, sorry, resolved. Oh, that. Yes, that part is.
Resolve the KAP lobby MASC to provide increased data accessibility to producers, example, IPI data, claim information and status, invoices and deposit information, and for the data to be available on their My MASC platform. All right, David, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, this was actually brought to my attention by my daughter, who was looking at the coverage levels for next year and noticed that our IPI had in wheat, which had been about 116% at one time, was less than 80 now. And we had a serious hail storm in 2019. We submitted all the third-party hail claims and expected that would be included to keep our IPI at a more reasonable level. And she found out that nobody dealt with that in 2019, and that's the reason that our IPI is so low. So she suggested that, and she worked with crop insurance, and I'm not just sure what the status of solving that problem is now, but because it was documented and sent in, it should be fixed. But at our meeting where we approved this at the district level, there was two other people that have had very similar problems. Sometimes because they didn't know to send it in, and sometimes because crop insurance didn't deal with it. But Dorian is asking that crop insurance be more responsible and more transparent with the data, so it's easier to track and know that it's being done accurately. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Any other comments?
I don't see any other hands. Oh,
Yeah, I don't see any other hands either.
well, Scott has one comment.
Okay.
Question.
Yeah, I did have one comment and question. I experienced something similar with a herbicide drift claim that was put in, and was concerned about that affecting my IPI. And you're absolutely right. The calculation of the IPI seems really opaque and difficult to understand. I did submit all of my insurance claims for that herbicide drift, and it was taken care of. But even at the end, I wasn't able to see how they were calculating that, or whether they'd properly done the calculation. So I think this is a great resolution. I do have one question about the resolution, and it's more semantics, I guess, or details here, but the claim information, status, invoices, and deposit information. I wasn't quite sure what we meant by deposit information, David.
Dorian had suggested that, so I can only guess. But just to be more transparent in terms of when those payments are coming through, would be my guess.
It's maybe a better wording of that, like a account balancing or something like that, possibly.
I'm open to that change if I don't know if it's necessary or not, but
Carter, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think the entire intent of this is just complete transparency on it. So I think the semantics of the wording on deposits and stuff like that is unnecessary, because we're just going to go to MASC and basically lobby for transparency of all the transactions and stuff like that. So a little bit on semantics is just kind of unnecessary, but I think with the deposits, that's also an important factor of it, like knowing when checks and stuff get sent out and amounts. And I think it's just a status report, basically being able to see everything that they're doing in timely fashion and transparency.
Thanks, Carter. Any other comments?
Not seeing any other hands at this time.
All right, with that, let's call a vote. Right, that passes 85% in favor. All right, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Colin, and that concludes the resolution portion of the meeting today. We'll move into the cross-provincial update. And maybe start with the member commodity associations that are in attendance. If there's, is there anyone, we'll start with Dairy Farmers of Manitoba.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jill. Yeah, we're still in a time when we have some really good demand that is on the horizon. And we've had some kind of leveling off of some of our, increases in our cost of production. So that has kind of leveled off. So, we're anticipating some demand coming forward with some new processing plants coming on board. We have a plant well, I guess it's not necessarily a plant. It's a concentration facility that's coming on board in Alberta that I think I've given a few updates on before. And so we are nearing the finish line on that. So we're looking to realize some savings in some of our transportation costs. So that's an exciting development that we're hoping to see up and running in May of this year. And then as far as other work that's going on, we're just looking forward across the country on, being able to work together nationally, especially when we're kind of looking at the uncertainty of things, across the border, that type of thing. So that's kind of the focus right now, is being able to work across the nation, kind of coordinating our efforts, and also at, working with our each of the provinces to work on some cross-border issues, like working to be able to streamline products going across different provincial boundaries. So that's just a quick update.
Perfect. Thanks, Christy Lane. We'll go on to, is there anyone from Keystone Potato Producers on the call today? Didn't know if Susan was on the call. If you you can put up your hand later on, I'll just keep moving on to the next one. I have Love Day Mushrooms. Manitoba Beekeepers.
Hey, Jill.
Hi.
Hey. Okay, so an update from our industry. Last year saw some challenges. We had the lowest production in over 2 decades at about 135 pounds. If we went back further, we could probably see this was one of the lowest productions on record. So there's challenging there, as well as we had a collapse in price of somewhere around 30% reduction. So there's been some challenges. We're still recovering from the provincial loss of 60% from 2022, 2023, which had agri-stability industry-wide triggering for the last 3 years. And then we've also are hearing that this year we are seeing losses started last fall again. So the industry is kind of still in crisis. So if you know a beekeeper, give them a hug. But we're still optimistic. We've been in this industry a while, and we're hopefully be able to get through this. So that's about it.
Great. Thanks a lot. Manitoba Bison Association.
Jill?
Yes. Yeah.
I did speak with Robert from the Bison Association last week.
Oh, perfect.
So just an update from the bison sector was a big focus on the cross-border trade with the US and navigating that as they sort of see how the potential tariffs will impact them and who's going to absorb. Those discussions are ongoing between the producers, processors, and transportation, et cetera. So that was just the main thing that we talked about. So just to provide that context. And then for the potato producers as well, I spoke with Susan yesterday, and we're currently working to understand some potential reduction in contracts from American buyers. So we're meeting with the minister, with Susan, as well as the chair of the Keystone Potato Producers on Friday, just to kind of have a bit of a further discussion. So that's one of the big issues again. So as we've noted, the tariffs are affecting both of those industries potentially.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Colin. Manitoba canola growers. Their board meeting was today, I believe, right, Colin?
Correct.
Manitoba chicken producers. Okay, Manitoba Crop Alliance.
Good morning, everybody. Lee Smith, representing Manitoba Crop Alliance. Colin, did you receive Pam's update?
I did not. I was with her yesterday, but I did not
Okay.
receive. Yeah.
Well, she's given me one to read over, and I'm just going to go through it kind of quickly and hit some of the points. So we are offering our advanced program payment program, which is set at $250,000 for the 2025 year. Just like to promote our interest rate on the interest-bearing portion. We're prime minus 0.5%. And then, so we also have a one-time application fee of $250. And you can call the office for more information. And we also have a website that you can go to as well. And it just went live on the 24th of February. We are also involved with the Research on the Farm program. And of course, we're calling for participants. I've been involved with this program for the last 3 years and have seen the benefits of doing this. So if anybody's interested, please contact the office at Manitoba Crop Alliance. On the advocacy side of things, we're offering a high school bursary. There'll be 6 of them. They'll be offered up to high school graduating this year. And so you can also, the deadline for that is May 2nd of 2025. So if people know of kids that want to get involved with this, this is for young people who are going to carry on in the agriculture sector. And also I'd like to just comment on the resolution. Manitoba Crop Alliance is a big supporter of Ag in the Classroom, and I feel that it's very beneficial to agriculture in Manitoba and across the country if our consumers have a good understanding of what we stand for. So we're also involved with research, production, and extension programs. We have a vast, we are involved with the Canadian Western Research Coalition in development of all of our wheat varieties concerning common blunt, fusarium head blight, and rust. And more information about this is available on our website as well. Pam's got in here something a little near and dear to my heart as far as flax. I sit on the flax committee, and I guess, as you might guess, the challenges of finding something that grows this year that pencils out well. Flax is one of those products that does actually pencil out. As we know, there are some challenges with growing flax, but we do have some extension specialists who can help with anybody who has questions about flax. We also have our upcoming MCA events and publications. Of course, we have our biannual newsletter, the Fence Post, which will be coming out to all of our farmers. There's also a barley seed and production webinar coming up through the Canadian Malt, Barley, and Technical Center. And so that more information on that will be available on our website as well. And we have a mark on your calendar. We're going to be doing an event with AFC in Brandon on August 7th, 2025. And so if you want more information on that, you can probably sign up for our heads up email or e-newsletter rather, and that'll keep you up to date. And so in upcoming events, go to Manitoba Crop Alliance and to the events calendar, And then you can also follow us on X and Instagram and all the other social medias. So that is my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. We'll go to Manitoba egg farmers. Lance?
Yeah, the challenges that we have is a shortage of eggs in the US and high prices, and the Canada relies on imports from the US to fill their processing market. So what the egg boards have been doing is by keeping older mature hens laying longer. So instead of just letting them lay for 12 months, we're going to 13, 14, 15 month cycles just to get the egg numbers up.
Great. Thank you, Lance. We'll go to Forage Seed Association and then Forage and Grassland Association. Is there anyone for either of those?
Hello, Duncan here from MFGA. If Manitoba Forage Seed is here, I'd happily wait my turn. If they're not here, I'll proceed.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Duncan.
Okay, I'll be very quick. When I was making my list here, we're just starting, MFGA is just starting into our regenerative agriculture conference planning for November 2025. We're just setting out our keynotes. It will be November 12th and 13th, once again in that slot. It will be our 8th year, and we never ever anticipated becoming somewhat of a conference host, but it has evolved that way, and we're very proud of it. For those farmers wondering about water conditions in the future, just a reminder, our MFGA Quanti model is on the portal at mfga.net. It does offer satellite field views of that we have on our portal, and it's free access for you and your associations. So please do take a look at that if in times of curiosity around some of the water coming up. And thirdly, I'm trying to catch up with Colin, but it appears he's been riding a comet since he started his meteoric ascent here. We do want to talk a little bit more about the soil health resolution, and we know that that will be talks in our very near future. And we'd also like to congratulate both Jill and Colin on their recent appointments, and thank you very much, KAP, for your updates on some of the turbulence of the times. MFGA, we really rely on that, so thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Duncan. Manitoba oak growers. Manitoba Port Council. Pulse Growers Association. Manitoba Seed Growers. Keep going down the list here. We have Sheep Association. Turkey producers. Prairie Fruit Growers Association. Sam still on the call?
I'm here. Morning.
Morning.
So we did recently attend Ag in the City, and otherwise we are just in planning mode and watching that snow melt, which it seems to really be on the go lately. So we'll see how soon spring comes.
Great. Thank you very much, Sam. And then lastly, we have our newest member, Manitoba Nursery and Landscapes Association. All right. So we'll move on to our districts with District 1 first.
Yeah, hi. I'll start off. Lots of melting happening here. Yesterday had some 7-degree weather, so we lost a lot of that field snow. But there's still a fair bit in some areas. Water's flowing good. It's muddy as usual. Guys are starting to get out, and I've seen a few pieces of equipment moving around to maintenance spots and shops and such. And that's kind of what we're doing on our operation as well, and just kind of beginning to gear up to winter. Road restrictions are starting to come into effect. I've heard a few highways already got them on, so guys hauling grain will be affected by that, obviously. And yeah, other than that, we're just eagerly awaiting spring and getting ready.
Great. Thank you, Carter. District 2.
I'm here, but honestly, I have no idea what's happening outside because my wife is in a cast and I've been basically her butler for the last 6 weeks. So I haven't talked to anybody. I don't even know what's going on because I don't even live at my farm. So I have no idea, Jill. Sorry.
Okay, we'll go on to District 3.
Well, similar in District 3, except I don't have a bedridden wife, Scott. So it's muddy out there. We're seeing people getting ready. There's fields that are black and there's not a lot of water out there. I suspect if we don't get a lot of snow on the weekend, we might, and it warms up a little bit, we'll probably see a pretty early seeding right now. Rail movement has been pretty brutal in our area. I know the 3 elevators, and I know I'm pretty lucky here, but within probably 15 miles of my farm, they're backed up. And so we're hoping that we can move some March grain before seeding, but it's looking like it might be right smack in the middle of seeding. So yeah, that's kind of what we're going on right here right now.
Great. Thanks, Colin. Okay, so we'll go to District 4.
Yeah, so Kevin Peters here, District 4. I'd say pretty similar to sort of what everybody else is saying. The snow is definitely disappearing, and the sun's shining, and things will probably, depending on weather, but things will probably be moving quicker than some of the past few springs. So seeds rolling in and equipment's getting maintained.
Perfect. Thanks, Kevin. District 5. And we'll move on to District 6. Craig, or is Sam still on the call?
I am, but I didn't make it to our district meeting.
Craig, did you want to make a couple comments, or do you want me to? You'll just have to unmute yourself.
You go ahead.
Okay. So District 6, yeah, we're faced with the of course the melting. So it does look like it could be earlier this year, certainly compared to last year in some areas, but time will tell with any moisture that we get out of what happens here on the weekend. And we're also the rail movement of grain is I echo Colin's comments, 3 to 5 weeks delay, I think, with the major throughput through G3, and looking into spring where things are definitely tied up and slower than anticipated. So there's considerable amount of grain still on the farm in our area. District 7. Don't have anybody. District 8. We'll go on to District 9.
We're sitting with quite a bit of snow. We're not as lucky as you guys. Yet It's melting some, but not a lot of moisture showing up. I think it's going in. It's the same concerns as everybody else.
Great, thanks, Keith. And District 10?
We still have a fair bit of snow here, lots of snowbanks as well. It's going to be a while before we think about getting on our land. I don't think that there's concern yet for the fall rye that was planted, but I think the farmers will be looking to the next couple of weeks and just see what weather transpires. I know the honeybee guys are starting to look at putting some bees out and feeding. And there's still a bit of grain in bins around here. Same thing, movement is tough. Elevators seem to be full. Not a lot of movement. So that's my report.
Great, thanks, Shannon. And lastly, District 12. James was on the.
Yeah.
Morning, James. Go ahead.
For sure. We've had some nice weather, some melting, but we have plenty of snow here and looking forward to some more on next couple of days. So we are a ways back from getting the equipment or seeding. Grain movement has been limited, small bursts here and there, but nothing substantial.
Great, thanks, James. Any other districts that I've missed? If not, I see David O'Rourke put up his hand. Did you have anything further from the district?
When we had a district meeting just a bit ago, I would suggest that there's a lot of worry and frustration with the tariffs or not tariffs, but some of them had mentioned that they were supposed to have had 13 B trains delivered of specialty canola, and they haven't moved any yet, and it's forcing them to sell other grains that they're not really wanting to. So that's frustrating. And then been threatened to some degree with canceling the whole contract. This is all movement into the States. So cash flow and some of those things are bothering some of the members. So we need to be kind to each other and help out wherever we can.
Thank you for that, David. And it certainly goes without saying that right now, with those pressures on cash flow, you know, farm stress definitely going into spring is top of mind for me, and certainly the impacts on our producers. So thank you for that comment. Lee, did you have an additional comment before we go to see if the other business? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I could speak a little bit to District 7, seeing as I live in it. The snow melt is proceeding here. Starting to see some flues. I would say the soil moisture we're kind of lacking a little bit going back into last fall, but I guess we're all looking forward to it. There's not much movement as far as guys getting ready yet here. I did have some questions put to me though in regards to parts and stuff. I guess there's a few guys getting phone calls from their dealership in regards to increase in pricing on parts, and I don't know if that's due to the 25% tariff on steel being added to that price, and then the parts coming up here. My hope is that price increase has got nothing to do with the counter tariff on parts coming into Manitoba or Canada. I guess a little clarification, and hopefully that is not the case, that our government would tariff parts coming in for agricultural producers. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Lee. Yeah, and I echo that there has been some talk and discussion from some of the dealers on increased costs of parts. So that could be something that we definitely can go over, Colin, as a concern. Thank you. With even the Equipment Dealers Association, we can certainly look with that, or with CAR. David, I'll leave you with the last comment here before I look to see if there's any other business.
Yeah, we brought in a fairly large shipment of parts from the States yesterday, and the certainly the price has gone up in the last 3 years, almost 3 times in some bearings. But there was no extra charge at the border in terms of tariffs. We certainly had to have our CARM paperwork in place, though. So I'm not sure why some of these dealers have been as proactive in increasing prices. But thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. Okay, I will now thank you for all of your updates. I'll open the floor here just for a minute. If there's any, I'm certainly conscious of the time. We're a few minutes over our 11 o'clock time, but we do have you know, a few minutes. If there's any other comments or other business at this time, I would entertain that before asking for adjournment of the meeting. So is there any other business?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hello, Butch, go ahead.
I read the seed magazines and I get the impression that they keep saying there's something, and I was hoping the Canadian seed growers would be reporting, there's something wrong with the Canadian seed growers model. But they never say what. And there's something wrong, and the structure isn't working. My suspicion is that the structure, I believe the seed growers has been fairly much represented by producers, but we're getting, my concern is that there are those who would like to have the industry have more control. And when I mean industry had more control, like having patent rights for longer years and stuff. They never say what is wrong, but I think they would like more industry representation than farmer representation, and that's a concern to me. I brought it up at the Crop Alliance meeting in Winnipeg, and that was ruled out of order. But anyway, that's a concern I have. I don't know what the feeling is of those that are more involved with the seed industry. What is wrong with the structure of the Canadian Seed Growers Association? That's what I'd like to know. And they're kind of veiled. And also, I never hear the impression when they want to modernize something that they will modernize it and maybe to reduce the price of seed. I never hear that either. Anyway, that's just a concern I have.
Thank you for that, Butch. Any other business coming out of the meeting? Any other questions? Well, I guess I will leave it with you to get ready for this spring. Producers, be safe, and for sure, if anything does come up or concerns, I know that crossing, you know, any examples that you can have or have gone through in regards to tariffs, it's always great to have those examples that we can actually point back to when we're in discussions with impact of some of these counter tariffs that are in place, and certainly welcome any of those comments or concerns or things that have happened. And with that, those two, I will point out in the chat, those two events that are coming up, the survey with KAP, as well as the event tomorrow in conjunction with Real Ag, with some more information on tariff. If you want to have that playing in the background as you're in your shop getting ready for spring. So with that, I guess I would ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting. Scott Melvin and Kevin Peters. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day and a great weekend, and take care. Bye-bye.